Hi, everybody. I wanted to take a few minutes over lunch break to talk a little bit about the Derek Chauvin trial that's ongoing. We're now entering into day 2, and welcome to all of you who have taken a moment out of your day to join up with me. Thanks so much for all your support. To my mods, I just had a free moment. I hope you'll accept my apologies for not giving you a lot of time in preparation, but I felt like it would be kind of important just listening to some of your comments to hear from you and share a few thoughts that I'm having as this thing progresses. And so let's just talk about this. The Chauvin trial is in the second day now in the death of George Floyd, and this is really an emotional trial for a number of reasons. The opening statements by the prosecution and defense yesterday, I thought, were really telling about the kind of trial and how emotional this trial is going to be. Chauvin is charged with a count of murder in the third degree. They call it perpetrating eminently dangerous acts and evincing depraved mindsets. He's also being charged with a count of manslaughter in the second degree murder charge of having culpable negligence, creating a unnecessary risk in the death of George Floyd. And if you think back, this happened not even a year ago, May 25th, 2020. And because of all of the disruption and the attention, I think it's been wise that they've moved fairly quickly. I hope that it's given the prosecution and the defense ample time to prepare. But let's chat for just a second about the opening statements. The prosecuting attorney, Jerry Blackwell, laid it out, I think, really well in his opening statement, saying in the state's opinion, the prosecution's opinion, and that's kind of weird when you think about a police officer, they usually are sitting on the side of the prosecution, but not in this case. The prosecution started by saying Mr. Chauvin betrayed this badge when he used excessive and unreasonable force upon the body of George Floyd. Now, the prosecutor continues. He said he put his knees upon his neck and his back, grinding and crushing him until the very breath. Pauses. Says, no, ladies, until the very life was squeezed out of him. Now, I don't think anyone who has not watched that had a ton of questions that came up and saw as they watched those videos what happened and saw what's happening. I want to just kind of remind you of the responsibility I believe we have to look at this, as hard as it might be, with two sets of glasses as we kind of think through these kinds of cases. Now, Chauvin's defense team countered, and if you remember, his name is Eric Nelson, who's representing Chauvin. He counters in his opening remarks by saying, a reasonable doubt is a doubt that's based upon reason and common sense. Now, he argues the evidence is far greater than the 9 minutes and 29 seconds, referencing the time that police officers had Mr. Floyd in custody and detained. Now, Nelson gives a glimpse into what the defense is really going to focus on, which is going to be, frankly, Floyd's behavior. He's going to focus a lot on body camera video and video from police cameras. That was a neighborhood that had a lot of surveillance cameras around because of the challenges in that neighborhood. Some have suggested that it's a very high crime area. I haven't looked at the crime stats for the area to see, and I am planning on doing that because it really can tell us a lot. But he said that the defense is also going to document Floyd's failure to comply with police, and that was evident by the police officer having to draw his weapon when he couldn't get Floyd to produce his hands. If you remember, when he's at the vehicle, that he struggles when police are arresting him. He does appear to me compliant when police take him over to the sidewalk. But at that time, too, the defense is going to argue that he swallowed pills containing a mixture of methamphetamine and fentanyl. and they're suggesting that it was a deadly concoction that lended to the death. The defense is also going to argue that Chauvin arrives as this thing's unfolding. Two other police officers have already put Mr. Floyd into custody when Chauvin and his trainee show up. He's serving, and this is kind of important, I think, to consider in this thing. He's training a new police officer. So he has the confidence of the police department to serve as a field training officer. And I think that's really important when we think about some of the things that the defense is going to say. Because then the defense is going to argue that Chauvin notices the officers struggling with Floyd as they're putting him into the patrol car. And this is really evident that there is a struggle going on, because you can see the patrol car actually rocking back and forth and moving as police officers are trying to get him into the vehicle and secured so that they can transport him to the jail. It apparently escalates to the point that they end up pulling Mr. Floyd out of the vehicle. And the defense attorney makes this comment, which I think is really powerful and yet a reminder of this business we call police business. He says, and this is again the defense attorney speaking, he says, the use of force is not attractive, but it is a necessary component of police work, indicative that this case is going to boil down, in my opinion, to a question of whether Chauvin followed department training protocols or he acted negligently and criminally. And that's really going to be the challenge here. And I wanted to just take a minute and talk about a couple things that I saw in the evidence that was being presented that really struck out at me. The first was the prosecution shows a photograph of Chauvin with his knee in Mr. Floyd's back. Some say in his neck. And I'm prefacing it that way for a really important reason I'm going to bring up here in just a second. But I wanted to show you a picture that I found that I thought was kind of interesting. Here we go. These are Minneapolis police officers and their badges hanging on their shirts. And I want you to it's kind of a weird thing that you're probably wondering, why on earth is he showing us this? Look how nicely the badges are lined up with the pleat in the shirt. They're very symmetrical. And then we get over to Officer Chauvin on Mr. Floyd after the physical confrontation. And I'm just going to tell you my opinion. Having fought with suspects, trying to get them under control, having fought with suspects who were handcuffed, trying to get them into a seatbelt and secure in a vehicle, I was just really impacted by the badge. And I want you to look at the badge, how it's twisted off to the side. It's probably been broken out of the pin. I'd be interested if they ever talk about this. But to me, it's an indication of some of the struggle that was going on. And again, is it relevant? I don't know, but it really stood out to me. And I'd really be interested in seeing what your comments are about that as you look at that down below. But then what I wanted to do is go over and take a look at the affidavit, the probable cause statement that charges Chauvin with these two murder charges. And so with that, I'm going to just pull up the actual affidavit. And I wanted you to just pay attention to a couple things. First thing is the counts that he's charged with. Count 1, murder in the 3rd degree, and count 2, manslaughter in the 2nd degree. But here's what I thought was kind of interesting in this particular case, and that was they go through all of the statements. And, you know, I get challenged from time to time on not having evidence right or information absolutely correct. And I hear others that do. One thing I saw is that the media keeps saying that the officer's name is King, K-I-N-G. It's actually Keng, K-U-E-N-G. And I'm going to just kind of put my cursor over that right here. But it goes in and it recovers the point where it says the weapon was drawn by the officer who reholsters the weapon after he determines that there's no threat. He then gets Mr. Floyd handcuffed, and Floyd walks with Officer Lane to the sidewalk and sits down. But as soon as he's told he's going to be going to jail and he's getting in the car, and of course, at this point, it's really going to be an important thing that they add, that they actually ask him, are you under the influence of anything? Because the defense has indicated that the store owners on their 911 call talk about the fact that they believe that Floyd is under the influence of something. But Floyd tells them, I'm claustrophobic. And for anybody that's claustrophobic, I mean, it's a real thing. And whether that's the real reason he stiffens up or something that's worked before, which the defense is going to try to show, they end up struggling with him in the car. There's no question that there's a struggle going on in the car. And then Floyd starts to say, I can't breathe. Now, this is kind of interesting because we're going to hear the prosecution and then the defense argue that Floyd is taken from the vehicle and put on the ground where he continues to resist. They're considering additional restraints to control his feet and legs and get him back in the car. But this is what I thought was really interesting that nobody seems to be talking about. It's said that, let me just go down to this. And this was really troubling to me, that he says, I can't breathe. And the police officers are responding, you're talking, Mr. Floyd, which obviously is an indication that he's breathing in and speaking out. But then at 8:24, Mr. Floyd stops moving, and Officer Lane checks his pulse and determines that he can't find a pulse on Mr. Floyd. And this was really troubling to me. And again, you know how pro law enforcement I am, but they go nearly 3 minutes without offering first aid to Mr. Floyd. And I think that's going to be a real tough question for them to answer. But I also thought it was really interesting that the prosecution in this probable cause statement makes it very clear that, let me see if I can find that. It's right here on the line that says, I can't breathe. Just above that, you'll see the defendant, speaking of Chauvin, placed his left knee in the area of Mr. Floyd's head and neck. I'm going to be really interested to see if they ever can put him with his knee on his neck pushing down. And I think there have been pictures that have shown that. Now, whether in struggling, it's moved back and forth, but I think it's so interesting that the prosecution really calls that out as in the area of his head and neck. So I think that's going to be something that we're going to all want to watch for as this thing unfolds. But then again, that 3 minutes passes and Mr. Floyd is not being given aid, and there's no pulse, no movement, and yet the officers are continuing to restrain him and hold him down. And I think that's going to be a real challenge that they're going to have to answer for. But then again, I found one other thing that really stood out at me in the prosecution's probable cause statement, where they say, and you see it underlined, the autopsy revealed no physical findings that support a diagnosis of a traumatic asphyxiation or strangulation. I think this is going to be a challenge for the prosecution to say that they caused him, by restricting his airflow, to die. And this is where the defense has made their argument. What they're going to be doing is arguing that self-medicated narcotic, methamphetamine, and fentanyl is going to be the cause of death, in addition to poor physical health. Well, again, I don't know. I just found that interesting. I wanted to share it with you, and just kind of close by saying, I think it's going to be really difficult. This is going to be a difficult case to watch, because nobody wants to see a human being suffering like Mr. Floyd was suffering, whether it was induced by police officer action or by medical condition and taking those medicines on his own, it is going to be difficult to watch. I think it's going to be difficult to predict how this might roll out. I wonder if they're going to have a hard time proving the second-degree murder, but they might get the manslaughter because of the negligence. But I want to go back to the fact that this is a training officer. Chauvin is a training officer, and the department has put a lot of trust in him as a training officer to teach policy and procedure, that he would have known what the policy and procedure was in order for him to be that training officer. And I think that's going to play real heavily in this investigation. I think it's also going to play real heavily in this investigation that Chauvin has been involved in other major events and up to 18 different complaints of brutality. Two of those, I think, resulted in actual discipline. He was also involved in a couple of shooting incidents. So he has worked in the toughest parts of the city. And whether he is a victim of multiple circumstances or it has something to do with his personality, that will be left to be said. The sad part to me is that even if he ends up being wrong, I don't understand a city that completely abandoned him and fired him the next day, rather than understanding this thing more deeply. And I'm just speaking as someone who, as a police officer, expected my administration to back me up. I also found it troubling that the $27 million civil settlement was awarded during jury selection, when everyone came to know that the city was trying to offload responsibility, in even suggesting by 27 million that there was responsibility in the city. I'm not saying one way or another. I'm just saying the timing was really poor, in my opinion, and showed poor judgment. Now, Chauvin has other problems. His wife's left him, filed for divorce. The IRS is suing both him and his wife for some fraudulent things on their tax forms, whether they were fraudulent or mistakes. I don't know. But this story is long from over. And I'm really going to be intrigued by how this thing comes about. Again, that probable cause statement, you might go online and read that. If you go to the Wikipedia site, you'll learn an awful lot about this, including being able to get more information on his background, his education, and his experiences as a police officer. This is really going to boil down to whether he was following training and protocol, or whether there was a criminal act involved. I hope you all have a great day. I'm so appreciative for all that you do in support of Profiling Evil. I hope you enjoyed King Tut last night. And for those of you who support me through channel memberships, through Patreon, PayPal, or Venmo donations, it is so appreciated. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to further conversations. Again, I look forward to reading your comments below as this trial unfolds. Today, we're seeing some pretty dramatic testimony of witnesses who were on site. But again, folks, as hard as it might be, please try to remain neutral as all of the evidence unfolds, and think about yourself as a juror, how you would be handling this particular case and how you'd be responding as things unfold. So with that said, I hope you all have a great day, and I wish you all the very best, and we'll look forward to getting together soon. Have a great day.